Hey everyone. So I've made a couple videos before about the issues that I've had with my family, with my parents specifically, and decisions that I've taken to set boundaries with them and reduce contact with them. Now, I've kind of spoken in broad terms about my childhood and a little bit more specifically about my relationship with my dad. I've not really spoken too much about my relationship with my mom because that is by far the more painful relationship for me to talk about. But I have been feeling like this pressing on my heart that I do want to talk about it. And not really necessarily for the benefit of other people. It's more like therapy for myself, I guess. And I do get actual professional therapy as well, which is something I recommend to everybody. Um, but I think there's a value in saying out loud the things that happen to you when you come from a family that refuses to talk about it. You're always kind of repressing the truth and having to hold it inside and carry the burden of that when your family refuses to speak about what happened. And so I do think that it's healing and liberating to talk about it openly and just say publicly, look, I'm not going to carry the shame of this. The shame of this does not belong to me. The guilt of this does not belong to me. This is what happened to me. I was victimized. And so partly that's what this video is about. This is about me saying, this is what happened to me. There is no shame in being a child who comes from an abusive family. And none of us should feel any kind of guilt or embarrassment or shame around speaking our truth, telling our story per se. Now, obviously, the decision about whether to speak up and tell other people, people outside of the family, what happened to you is always a very personal one. And for a very long time, most of my life, I didn't want to talk about it, or I felt like I couldn't. And owning it and speaking up about it has been a very kind of gradual, slow process for me. This video is going to be long. I don't know how long it's going to be. I'm someone who takes a long time to process things and get my feelings out. And I like to be thorough and I like to speak until I've said everything that I want to say. So I tend to make more long form style content as a result. And if that kind of thing is not your particular thing, I totally understand. I I understand if you prefer like shorter style content. But this is not going to be that. This is going to be me kind of speaking in a more kind of freestyle stream of consciousness kind of a way. I do have some points that I want to talk about just regarding my healing process. But again, as I say, I don't know how long the video is going to be. And I might also make it in, multiple parts. I don't know yet. I'm also going to include some resources in the description of the video, things that have been extremely helpful for me. You know, just to include resources, anyone who resonates with my story, anyone who's had a lot of these experiences themselves, maybe you might get benefit from the resources that I link. Some of the sources are people who are mental health experts, therapists, researchers, psychologists, those sorts of people. And others are just the stories of other survivors who I have particularly resonated with, and that have helped me in processing my own experiences. Um, so I guess the video is going to be roughly uh, 2 sections, I think. As I say, this is just going to be me kind of processing my own thoughts and feelings. So I don't exactly know 100% what form it'll take. I might go down a few little rabbit holes and on tangents here and there. And that's just, I'm a very neurodivergent person. And that's kind of how my brain works sometimes. And so that's the type of content that I make. That's how I make videos. And again, maybe you like that, maybe you don't. Either way, it's totally cool. But yeah, where was I going with that? So, oh yeah, so roughly 2 sections to this video. I think the first part of the video is going to be me talking about my experiences with my mom, whom I do believe suffers from a personality disorder. She's never been diagnosed, and the chances of her being officially clinically diagnosed are extremely slim because she doesn't agree with or believe in therapy. So that's going to be the first part. And then the other part is just going to be me talking a bit about my healing journey. And the healing journey is something I have a lot to say about. So that is the part that I might continue in another video. Just depends whether I have the energy to talk about it all today, or whether I have to kind of divide it into, different videos. Because I did really think about what has gone into the path that I've taken to heal from what I went through, and I'd really tried to distill my thoughts down to some main points that could be useful for other people. Having said that, though, I want to make it extremely clear that I am not a mental health professional. I'm not pretending to be an expert. I am not an expert. And so nothing I say in this video should be taken as any kind of expert advice. I don't really believe in giving people advice about what to do with their own lives. I say this in other videos, when I talk about dating coaches and that. I say that I don't want anyone to take things that I say as being advice for their own life. And that's part of it. I'm not an expert, I'm not qualified. That's the one aspect. And the other aspect is, even if I was qualified, one of the foundations of therapy is that you should be empowered to come to your own conclusions and to develop trust and confidence in yourself. And that's what I believe. So this is primarily me talking about what has worked for me and what I believe in, in terms of some truths that I have come to in my own journey. But I'm not telling anyone else what to do. I could never, I would never. That's not my place. So please, if you do feel like you need support, obviously watching videos on YouTube is great. It's been invaluable for me. I've received invaluable information and help and resources from YouTube and videos and sources on the internet. That it's great. Even online forums like Reddit and other kind of mental health forums for people struggling with various mental health related issues are extremely valuable. But if you need support beyond that, I really encourage you to seek out a therapist who gets it, a therapist who can validate you and guide you through the process. Seek out supportive people in your life as well. People you can confide in, whom you feel comfortable and safe with enough to do that. I know that, I have a couple of co-workers who have also been through difficult experiences with their moms, and I can sometimes talk to them. Now, I wouldn't necessarily recommend pouring your heart out to a friend in the same way that you might do with a therapist. There's boundaries there as well. But it definitely can be a valuable source of support, seeking out other people and friends, and even people who haven't been through the same thing as you, people who have enough empathy to hold space for you, to understand, to care, people that you trust. So I encourage you to do that, and always defer to your own feelings and always listen to how you feel, always listen to what is going on in your gut, in the core of your being. I really believe that the way through this, the healing path, is should always be driven by you and your own feelings. It's something that you can use your heart, your feelings to guide you when in doubt. And of course, seek support and help and resources from other places as well. So all of that kind of out of the way. Where do I begin? My relationship with my mom is very confusing, and it has been very confusing my entire life. The truth of a lot of things has been obscured by my mom's interpretation and the way that she presents things. I strongly believe that my mom exists in a kind of deluded reality, where facts and truth are obscured, and I think my mom's reality sometimes bears little resemblance to the real world. I'm going to say this, and this might seem controversial to some people, but because I'm not clinically qualified to diagnose someone, but because I have such intimate experience and knowledge of my mom, and obviously because I lived through being raised by her, I do believe that she has a personality disorder. As I say, I'm not qualified to diagnose her, but just from my vantage, and I would never tell her that I think she has a personality disorder, but from my vantage point and everything that I have looked into about borderline personality disorder, I believe that's what she suffers from. It fits so much of her behavior and what I experienced of her as her child. And as I say, she will never be diagnosed because she will never seek out such a diagnosis or any kind of professional help for her issues. And as I say, it might seem a bit controversial for me to say that I think that's her diagnosis, because I'm not qualified, and even because I've said in another video that I don't believe we should be diagnosing people. So maybe that's a bit hypocritical of me to say, but I have so much at the hands of my mom, and I've been driven to just try to understand what I went through and the way that she is. And that has taken me down a path of learning about personality disorders. And so anyway, that's what I believe. Doesn't necessarily matter whether it's 100% accurate or not, but that is what I believe. And it has helped me to make sense of a lot of the things that happened to me. And so I believe it's valuable from that point of view. Doesn't even necessarily matter whether it is 100% accurate or not. I think my mom suffers from BPD. As a child, and even this lasted right up until I was in my 20s, and started setting boundaries with her. But as a child, my mom subjected me and my brother to violent fits of rage. She would fly into a rage almost on a daily basis. It just became the norm in the mornings when we were leaving the house to go to school. The thing that usually set her off was that she couldn't find her keys. And I know that's like the pettiest shit. But this is this is just how it was. Um, every single morning, she would fly from one end of the house to another, screaming at the top of her lungs and demanding that my brother and I help her to look for her keys because she had misplaced them. And that was just the way we started our day. It was just in a panic, a hypervigilant panic state of terror that we just had to find her keys. And I was always totally bewildered by this. Like, how can a person lose their keys every single day? Like, at what point do you just realize you need to put the keys on the key rack? But I think it was just an excuse. I think the keys was just an excuse for her to fly into a rage. If it hadn't been the keys, it would have been something else. It would have been that her tea wasn't hot enough, or that. See, that's what people who are personality disordered do. They project the rage that they feel out onto the external reality. They externalize it all. They don't see it as their own issue. They see themselves as victims of the situation. So this is just how it was. And she would scream and swear and like shout, and I mean like scary. The fits of I was terrified of her as a child. The fits of rage were truly, truly scary. And she would, if you were so unfortunate as to get into her way while she was in one of these fits of rage, she would viciously cut you down. Demean you. Me and my brother when she was having these fits of rage, she would demean us. She would ruthlessly criticize us. She would find fault. Nothing that we ever did when we were getting ready for school in the mornings was good enough. That is the memory that I have of mornings before leaving for school. I was just in a state of complete anxiety and terror and feeling like I had failed before my day even began. There were so many mornings that I got to school and just about to start the school day, about to start the routine of classes and going to assembly and talking to my friends and all this kind of thing. And I had already been subjected to horrible abuse, particularly verbal abuse that morning. And I was already like spent and finished and in such a state of distress. My best friend when I was a child just often saw me arriving at school either in tears or just extremely upset, and she just couldn't understand how a mother could cause their child to feel that way. She obviously had a very caring, calm, kind, loving mother. And I think, honestly, if you haven't had a mother with these sorts of issues, you just can't understand. You can't wrap your if you've had a good enough mother, a very loving mother who mostly met your emotional needs and was there for you the way that a mother is supposed to be and treated you mostly the way that a mother is supposed to treat a child and cared for you and helped you, then you can't understand what it's like to have a mother like this. You can't wrap your brain around it. But it was awful. Um, my mom could also be she would like vacillate between states of being very warm and charming and like over the top generous almost, and moods of being very cold and dismissive and withdrawing. Um, that it was, she would swing between these two states. Um, she would work herself up into a rage and obviously direct that outwards at other people in the family, me and my brother particularly, but also my stepdad. And we would all become kind of collateral damage. And sometimes it would result in conflict because, of course, like someone who is behaving like that is obviously going to have conflict with other people. But if you pushed back and tried to kind of defend yourself, you would get swept up in some sort of awful conflict with her, and she would become very abandoning. Um, I have a memory of being very small because it was at a time when my mom and dad were still married. So I must have been like maybe 4 years old, 3 or 4. And my little brother, who was 2 years younger than me, would have been just a little tiny toddler, like a baby. So he would have been 2, 1.5, 2 years old. And she had us bundled up in the car. She was driving around at night, just driving through the streets aimlessly, ranting. And she was in one of her fits of rage. Something about being a parent, something about being a mother, and the needs that we had provoked her to a fit of rage. And she had us in the back of the car, and she was just going on and on and on about how she was looking for an orphanage that she could drop us off at because she didn't want to be our mother anymore. She said she was not going to be our mother anymore. She was going to drop us off at an orphanage. And this is something she said many times to me as a child. And like it's horrific. It's like how do you even characterize that? How do you even find words to explain what that is or what that does? And if she thought maybe that um, I have taken to feeding a feral cat, or kind of somewhat adopted him, and he's at the window crying, so I'll be right back. So I went and fed him and gave him a few pets. Um, I have set up a bed for him in my greenhouse, like a nice cozy bed with a big cushion and some felt blankets. And it was so cute. When I came through this morning, and I looked out into the greenhouse, he was curled up on his bed and he was fast asleep there until just now when he appeared at the window crying for to be fed. So, but he's still a little wild, but he's actually coming along nicely. He's I can interact with him quite a lot now, um, which is nice. But unfortunately, he and my cat don't get along, so he can't come into the house. But the greenhouse is really like it's nice and dry, and it's actually quite warm in there, so it's an ideal spot for him. Yeah, so I suppose that was kind of a nice little distraction from what I was talking about, but I was just describing how my mom used to say these really abandoning things when I was growing up. There was that incident where she was just driving around with us in the back of the car saying she was going to drop us off at an orphanage. And I was little, but I knew what she was saying, and I was absolutely terrified. I was terrified. I was like, I'd heard awful things about orphanages. Like, obviously, the idea of being separated from your parents at that age is absolutely heartbreaking and terrifying. It was just the terror that I felt. And that was something that was repeated many times throughout my childhood. Each time she would have some sort of a conflict with me that was always over something completely petty and inconsequential, something that didn't matter, something like that I'd lost, an item of clothing or a piece of an item of my school uniform, or if I'd forgotten to do something, or if she, like, just anything that she could grasp onto that she could fly into a rage about and punish me for. And then tell me, she would say to me, and she would make me feel like a huge screw up. Um, over these things. And she would say, and I'll never forget this line that she used. She would say to me as a child of, 9, 10, 11, 12 years old, she would say, I wash my hands of you. You're not my daughter anymore. I'm not your mother anymore. That's what she would say to me. I wash my hands of you. And she would get this really contemptuous look on her face, like this very cold, distant look. And she would say, I wash my hands of you. I'm not your mother anymore. I don't know where you're going to live. I don't know who's going to take you in, but I can't deal with you anymore. And like, and just as I say, in case you're tempted to think that I was a really awful and naughty child, I wasn't. I was extremely well behaved. I was I achieved well at school. I was kind, I was polite, I was nice. I was nothing wrong with me as a child at all. If anything, I was a lovely child. I know that I was. I can say that quite confidently and comfortably. Um, Even if I'd had some developmentally appropriate, you know, issues growing up, that's just what happens with kids. It's just totally abusive to say something like that to a child. But my mom said it to me many times. And I remember as a child, before I had the logical reasoning ability to reason out that she wasn't in her right mind when she said stuff like that, and that she didn't necessarily mean it. It didn't hurt any less to know that, but I could, at least at a certain age, I was able to rationalize that she wasn't going to follow through with it. But when I was a child, like a younger child, every time she said that, I would experience the most heartbreaking, devastating sadness that you can possibly imagine, thinking that I was just going to be ripped away from my family for something that I'd done wrong, apparently some mistake that I'd made as a child, um, and that I was going to be ripped away from my family and rejected and abandoned and just given to some random person or stuck in an orphanage and never going to see my parents or my brother again. That's what I thought as a child. And I thought, like, what am I going to do? How am I going to how am I going to cope with this situation? Like, what does that mean? You're not my mother anymore. I couldn't comprehend it. The emotions of that were overwhelming and upsetting to a degree that I can't even describe. But I'm sure if you are an empathetic person, you can put yourself in the shoes of a child in that situation. But I believed her each time she said that for quite a while, until I wised up a little bit and realized she was just talking out of her out of her moods. And um so there was a lot of that. There was a lot of verbal and emotional abuse in the form of extremely critical things that she did and said. She was very demeaning sometimes. When she would get into a mood, she could be very critical in that sort of cold, underhanded way. Like, there were little digs that she would take. I could be here all day giving examples. I don't know if I really want to do that. Um, but if you've had a mother like this, I'm sure you can imagine what those sorts of criticisms would be like. I developed an eating disorder around the age of 12, and it lasted into my teenage years. Um, and I developed a real obsession with being, perfect, or trying to be perfect, and never trying to never make a mistake. And a lot of children who have been made to feel that way do develop eating disorders or other self-harming behaviors as a way to try to get control over their lives, over their experience, to try and get some kind of a sense of being able to control what happens to them. And I thought that if I could just be thin enough, if I could just have the perfect body, then maybe I would get the love that I craved. Um, and thankfully, I did come out of that in my sort of later teenage years. And I went on to put a lot of work into repairing my relationship with food and with my body. And I'm very proud to say that I have a very healthy relationship with my self-image and with my body and with food and exercise and all that kind of thing. I think I have a healthy relationship with all of that now. But that was a very distressing time. It was a very devastating time for my self-worth and my self-esteem. And no one in my life seemed to connect it to what I was going through with my parents. Um, but my mom made me feel like perfection was the only option for me. I was not allowed to fail. I was not allowed to make mistakes. I was not allowed to be imperfect. I always had to be perfectly polite. I always had to look perfect. I always had to treat other people in a totally selfless way. I always had to subjugate my own needs and feelings and desires to those of other people. These were the things I internalized growing up because of my mom, because of how she was as a mother. She was very neglectful. In addition to being very critical of me and holding me to an impossible standard of behavior, she herself was very neglectful of her maternal duties and responsibilities. I spoke in the other video about us being left alone for huge chunks of time, all the time, by her. She was always absorbed and preoccupied with what she was doing. And yes, there were times that she sort of swooped in and played a role of being a doting mother. It was a little bit like being in a Disney movie, honestly. Like you have someone who is off camera, off stage for a lot of the time, and then every now and again they swoop in and they'll give you lavish Christmas presents or take you on some sort of a great experience, and they'll sprinkle in these bits of kind of love bombing type things that they genuinely believe makes them a good mother. And to you kind of, as the child, you cling on to these things as evidence. Oh, my mother really does love me. But inside, you just feel empty and invisible. And that's how I felt. And so there was this criticism, there was this neglect, there was this horrible verbal and emotional abuse. And then there was physical abuse as well. There was a lot of that. My mom could be really physically aggressive. And I've since learned that that's actually quite common with people who suffer from BPD. Mothers who suffer from BPD have a very high tendency to be physically aggressive. And she was. she would, I would have never described it as beating. If you had asked me, when I came out of my, when I was fairly freshly out of my childhood, if you had asked me, did my parents beat me? I would have said no, because I was just so conditioned and socialized to see it as just acceptable discipline that they doled out. My dad wasn't physically abusive, but my mom was. Um, but my mom would give me and my brother, but I'll just focus on my own experience. But she would give me what she would call hidings, which meant she would, and these were for small infractions. These were for things that other parents probably wouldn't have even punished their child for, like leaving a homework book at school by mistake, and forgetting to bring something home, or misplacing an item, or borrowing maybe an item of her clothing, or borrowing something of hers without asking. It would be things like this. She would blow these up way out of proportion, as if they were the most heinous crimes that you could possibly commit against her, as if she had been severely victimized by her own child. That was the narrative. And she would give me these hidings. And I think I even spoke in my last video, I was talking about being a child of about 7 or 8 years old. So I would have been in about grade 2. And she used to give me the check for my school fees to take to the school office to pay my school fees. Now, why on God's earth she felt in her own mind that it was acceptable to place that responsibility on a 7 or 8-year-old, I don't know. But she used to give me the envelope with the check in the morning. It would get stuffed into my school bag. I would invariably forget to take it to the office because my mind was so full of other things, what I was dealing with at home being one of them, but also just going to school, trying to, cope with everything in school as well, my classes and homework and sport and all this kind of thing. The envelope with the check would get forgotten about. She wouldn't ask me that day whether I had remembered to take the envelope and gently remind me the next day. Oh no, she would leave it for weeks, say nothing about it, probably knowing full well I hadn't taken the envelope and that it had been completely forgotten about. It had been pushed to the bottom of my bag. She never used to check my school bag ever. She regarded that as kind of beneath her. That was keeping track of my school bag was 100% my responsibility. So she never used to check what was in my school bag. And because I was a child of neglect, in many ways I neglected myself as well. And things would just get stuffed in my school bag and forgotten about. And the check would just get forgotten about. And she would, after like a month or two, she would just randomly go and rummage in my school bag and triumphantly pull out this crumpled envelope that had the check in it for my school fees. And she'd pull it out and she would use that as an excuse to fly into a rage, the likes of which you cannot conceive of. It was terrifying. I would be shaking. I would be absolutely and utterly terrified. I would beg her to not hit me, but she would. She would take me into a separate room. She would pull down my pants and she would bend me over and she would take a leather shoe. She wore these like leather sandals that had it was a leather shoe and it had like a hard sole. And I'm sorry if you find this description upsetting. I need to get it out. I need to say what happened to me. But she would take this and she would wallop me. She would thump me on my bare bottom with all her might as an adult. And I was a little girl. And she would wallop me. It was so painful. She would be angry, furious, and she would pour her anger and contempt into that act of walloping me. And it was so, so, so sore. And eventually she would stop, and I would run out of the room in tears, just in worlds of pain. And I would go and curl up on my bed and just weep and cry. Not just for how physically painful it was, but just how totally distressing and upsetting it was to be hurt like that by someone that you absolutely idolized, being your mother. And every child, or most children, worship their parents. And I did. I just longed for their approval and their love, and to have that happen. And when I was younger, she would feel really guilty about it often afterwards. And more often than not, she would come through to my bedroom afterwards, and she would sit on the bed and she would give me a hug, and she would apologize and say that she lost her temper and that she shouldn't have done that. Um, and so the sort of cycle of abuse would continue, and it would happen again. And eventually, like, she just stopped apologizing for it. So that continued. Those hidings, as she called them, I now call them what they were: beatings. It was physical abuse. I call it by its proper name now. I refuse to use that. To me, hiding is a euphemism, and I refuse to use that word. But that's the word she used. But those stopped. When I became a teenager, I suppose she felt like it was no longer appropriate. But the emotional abuse got worse. The demeaning comments got worse. The tearing down of my self-esteem got worse. She would find very random, odd moments to make me feel shameful about things that I never needed to feel shameful about. But she would turn very ordinary situations into an incident where she could humiliate me and make me feel shame. Like, there was an incident where she was giving a lift to one of my friends from school. I was about 13. This was in grade 8, so yeah, I would have been 13. And my friend was talking about her recent holiday to a game reserve and the animals that she'd seen: elephants and giraffes and things like that. And I chimed in. I was like, really excited to join in the conversation. And I was talking about how I had been to a game reserve as well, and that I had seen lion and cheetah. And I was just sharing in the conversation as a 13-year-old. And my mom took me aside afterwards and she said, you always have to one-up people, don't you? Your story always has to be bigger and better. Did you not see how bad you made your friend feel, that you had to have an experience that was bigger and better than hers? And she made me feel like this big. She made me feel like an absolutely shitty person. When that wasn't what I was doing at all. I don't even think my friend, like, no one else involved in the situation thought anything was wrong except my mom. She kind of, if she couldn't find something that you were actually doing wrong, she would just make it up. And this happened many times. And as I say, she would kind of alternate between these abusive things that she would do, and then also she'd praise you at other times and tell you how great you were and how you were just so exceptional. And it was everything within my experience of my relationship with my mom seemed to be a reflection of the mood she was in and how she was feeling about herself. And I think in that way, like, BPD mothers will turn their children into an extension of themselves, and they don't allow their children to fully separate. Like, your sense of self is always tied to what she thinks of you and whether or not she says you're okay. And this is something I struggled with for a long, long time afterwards. You know, it's something that it's taken me many years and decades to unpack and to reclaim myself for myself and my own individuality. And I believe that, again, that this is a really common experience for children of BPD mothers. You know, the sense that enmeshment, um, yourself becomes enmeshed with the whims and vagaries of your mother. But the physical abuse part actually flared up again very strangely when I was in my early 20s. Very weird. Very, very strange. So my brother passed away when I was 18, and it was shortly before his 16th birthday. He was in a tragic drowning accident. I was not there. And I will never ever forget the night that I found out that he was gone. And I was just never the same again after that. And he was my ally. He was my world. My brother and I were very close. And when he died, my mom really went off the deep end again. I mean, she was kind of a nightmare throughout my entire life, but she had periods of time where she was better than others. And I would say during my teenage years, things were a lot calmer. She was emotionally abusive, but like the fits of rage got better. And so like there were periods where when I was a teenager, where I would have said that my mom and I were close almost, but it was like this uneasy closeness where I felt always like I was trying to please her. And like there were still lots of conflicts between us because she could be extremely hurtful and create fights out of nothing. And it was just lots of time that I was in pain and miserable over it. But at least the physical abuse kind of stopped when I was a teenager. But then it flared up again after my brother died. My mom really went off the deep end and she became worse than I had ever seen her in my life before. She just lost it completely after my brother died. She became just impossible. Like it wasn't even like difficult or impossible. She became a monster. Honestly, so abusive to me and my stepdad in particular. Like we were beside ourselves. She was causing, especially him and me, so much suffering. But I was suffering so badly already over the loss of my brother, and then having to deal with my mom, who was completely out of control in terms of her temper. But she started during this time becoming physically aggressive. And it wasn't even like when I was a child where she would give me a beating for something specific that I'd done, and it was kind of disguised or couched as being like, it was framed as being discipline. This was not even like that. She just went off the rails and just started becoming physically aggressive out of nowhere. I remember we were in the kitchen, she and I were in the kitchen preparing food for my 21st birthday party, which I was going to have at home. And we were busy, we were busy making pudding for the birthday party. And I suppose she was be like ready to fly off the deep end, fly off the handle, go off the deep end about pretty much anything in these days. But I suppose that what had particularly triggered her was the idea of me being the center of attention for my 21st birthday party and her having to put in all this effort to be a hostess or to make food for the party. And she was working herself up into a rage about this, about how no one appreciated her and all the effort that she was putting in. And she was just getting furious about that, about having to be a mother, really. And I was I was trying my best to ignore her, to be honest. I'll never forget this incident. We were making lemon pudding because that was my favorite. She had actually asked me what pudding I wanted, and I said lemon pudding because that was my favorite. And I was separating eggs for the pudding. I was standing over the kitchen counter separating eggs into a bowl. And she flew across the kitchen. She had a bucket in her hand. One of those those plastic basins that some people wash their dishes in. It's like a rectangular plastic basin. She flew across the kitchen with this thing in her hand. She launched herself at me, flew at me. I didn't even see her coming. She was so quick, I didn't see her coming. And she like hit me with it on my left arm. She came at me and just beat me with it. And she continued to hit me so that this thing shattered in several places. Like, think about that. Think about the force that you would have to use on a person. Never mind your own 20-year-old daughter, who is not a big person. I was very skinny. I'm a small, petite person anyway. I'm not tall or big or anything like that. And I was thin back then. I was about 45 kilos and 5'4". I was skinny. I had a little arm. And she took this thing and she beat me and broke it on my arm in several places. Like, think about the force you'd have to use to do that. And the thing shattered. And I will never forget. I was so horrified. I was in total shock. I just dropped the eggshells on the counter. I just dropped it all where I was. I ran out of the kitchen, the tears just streaming down my face. And I ran to my bedroom and I locked myself in my bedroom. And I did not know what was happening or what had just happened. And fortunately, I actually had my own car at this stage, and my bedroom had its own entrance. And my car was parked just outside the external entrance that I had to my bedroom. So I was able to lock my bedroom door and let myself out and get into my car, and I drove straight to the police station. And it was a very nice, lovely police officer who took me into a room and let me tell him what had happened. And I just told him everything that had happened. And he asked me if I wanted to press charges or take it any further. And honestly, the thought of that just horrified me. I'm like, I think back on it now, because what my mom did was criminal. It was assault. It was really serious assault. And I sort of think what would have happened if the police had shown up at the house. But at that point in my life, I was so conditioned to protect her and to protect the family image and to pretend like nothing had happened, and or not pretend, like at that stage I wasn't pretending like nothing had happened, but I went back to pretending like nothing had happened shortly after this. But in that moment, I thought to get myself to the police station so I could tell a responsible adult, a responsible person, what had happened. And I told this police officer, and he asked me if I wanted to press charges, and I said no. And he said, "Do you feel safe to return to the house?" And I said, "I don't know. I think so." I said, "I'm just going to stay out of her way. I'm going to," and he handed me a business card which had a phone number that I could call day or night if I felt unsafe. And he said, "You call that phone number anytime." I think he might have been a detective, one of these. I know that some detectives in the police force, like, are kind of will respond to emergencies even if they're not on duty. And it had like his business phone number or mobile number or something, and he said, "You phone that number day or night if you feel unsafe, and I or another police officer will come to the house." And that gave me the confidence. I suppose it was so that I didn't have to go through the switchboard of the police station. I don't know, but it was, and I know that in South Africa there are certain detectives who will respond to, if someone calls their business mobile, they will respond even if they're not on duty. And that kind of gave me the confidence to go home. I clung on to, I remember very clearly, I put that business card into my wallet, and I was, yeah, and it gave me, just having that phone number gave me the confidence to go home. And I went home and I let myself back into my bedroom, but I kept the door to my bedroom locked, and I stayed in my room for the rest of the day. So this incident happened in the afternoon, and I stayed in my bedroom until the next day. And the following morning, at some point, I let myself out of my bedroom. I don't know what story my mom ever told about why the bucket was broken, I don't know what my stepdad or anyone else ever knew about that incident. I never spoke about it to them again. I never spoke about it with my mom again. I just didn't. She kind of ignored me, where she was very cold towards me. She never apologized for that incident, never talked to me about it. She was very cold, and we just kind of stayed out of each other's way until my birthday party, which I think was that night or the following night. Must have been that night, I think. And she just gradually went back to pretending like nothing had ever happened. But there were several incidents after that as well, a few incidents. I don't know how many, maybe 3 or 4 incidents, again, where she worked herself up into a rage. None of them were ever as bad as that, but there were incidents where she worked herself up into a rage and launched herself at me. And it assaulted me physically again, and not as severe as that, but still very violent physical abuse, slapping me in the face, or like, I remember there were a few incidents where she chased me into the bathroom and like cornered me into the bath, like the bath, which was empty, had no water in it, but she would corner me and like get me into a corner and like come at me, like, physically threaten me. And I'll never forget like, she obviously at some point decided she was done with doing that, because there was another time we got into some sort of an altercation. She flew into some sort of a rage again, and she saw the fear in my eyes. And I remember her saying and she looked at me straight in the face and she said, "Are you scared I'm going to hit you? Are you worried I'm going to hit you?" And I said, "Yes." And she just kind of smirked. and she didn't hit me. And she just kind of got over it, and she just never did that again. But the fear of that stayed with me for a very long time. And I remember I started putting in work. I mean, it's just, it's madness really, but like I can talk about it now where I was mentally at the time. I put in effort to becoming very physically fit and strong. So just because it gave me the confidence to not be afraid of her, for a long time, she was a bigger, stronger person than I was. And then that changed at a certain point, and I became stronger than her. And she got older, and I was no longer afraid of her physically. But then I also, it started a whole process of setting boundaries, and I just set more and more boundaries with her. And like, it's insanity really, because those incidents of physical abuse happened and they were never addressed or spoken about or discussed. It was never discussed in my family. It was never discussed between me and my mom. I think I did try once, and I did say, look, you physically assaulted me. You physically came at me and hit me. And she, like a typical borderline, could not accept that as something she had done wrong. So I remember clearly her sitting on my bed and turning it around on me and saying, well, even if you only have 1% responsibility in the situation, you need to own your 1%. That's what she said to me. So fucked up. So fucked up. But I couldn't, because she could be intermittently loving as well and charming and warm, it stopped me from really dealing with this trauma for a long, long time, the trauma of everything I went through with her. It was just a really, really, really fucked up thing when you have a mother who won't take responsibility, and the whole family kind of conspires to enable that person to continue being the way that they are. And I started to put in boundaries in my 20s. It was a gradual process for me. I started to put more and more boundaries with things, and there's just, I could be here for 10 years talking about the layers of this when it comes to my mom. I was going to talk more about my healing and about putting in boundaries and all that kind of thing, but this has all taken quite a lot out of me just to discuss up to this point, just to get this far. So I hope you guys will excuse me. I think I'm actually just going to leave it there for the moment. I don't have it in me to continue to talk about this right now. I'll come back to this and talk more about how I put in boundaries and how I started to heal. But it's felt very therapeutic for me to get all of this out and to say it and to name it. So if you have listened this far, thank you. Thank you for listening. It means a lot to me. And I'll be back. I'll be back to talk about this some more. And I hope maybe for people who've also gone through abuse at the hands of a mother, at the hands of a parent, maybe knowing that someone else has been through it, and that, hearing the experiences of someone else, maybe it'll help you to feel less alone. I know I feel a lot less alone when I hear other people's stories. So, anyway, I'll be back next time. I'll talk a bit more about how I moved forward after all of that. Bye, everyone.